Welcome, Christina. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for hosting this series. We are so grateful for this opportunity to share more about the Farmers Land Trust, the Farmland Commons, but more specifically, the Blue Rock Farmland Commons and Blue Rock Station and Annie. And so, yeah, if anyone missed the last session, there is a recording up already that shares Annie and her story and more about Blue Rock Station. And of course, we're going to talk about that tonight too. But tonight we are going to share more about the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Commons. And so we are the Farmers Land Trust. We work nationally to protect farmland, but also to transition it into community ownership to ensure regenerative agriculture and long-term, secure, affordable tenure for next generation farmers. So before we get started, just a little introduction. My name is Christina and I live in Middle Tennessee. My partner and I steward 70 acres of land, and we grow vegetables using organic and biodynamic methods. We also have a herd of dairy cows, and we do raw milk, herd share, and so forth. And I just made spaghetti tonight for dinner with sauce that I canned from the summer. And so this picture just has me thinking about how delicious dinner was. Anyway. I come to this work as a young farmer who struggled with land security and also as someone who knew and love and respect so many elder retiring farmers who struggled with how they were going to transition their land and really wanted to help do something to bridge the gap between the young farmers needing land access and the aging farmers who deserve an equitable exit from their land.
And my name is Ian McSweeney. I'm the other co-executive director of the Farmers Land Trust. I live in southern New Hampshire. I have two boys who you can see there who are not much longer boys. They're in their teenage years now. My work has been focused on farm conservation, farm ownership, farm transitions towards community, equity, tenure, and autonomy. I've done that work in real estate, in private philanthropy, running a foundation, and then in the nonprofit world. And my kind of beliefs and what brings me to this work is that land and who has access, equity, and tenure to land is so essential to agriculture, to culture, and to communities. And yet, so few people and so few systems and organizations focus on that. And even within the land trust world, where most of my work has been, the focus is on protection of land for the most part and conservation easements that we'll touch on, but it's not on that ownership, equity, tenure piece. So really that's my work and has been my focus is trying to kind of bring about innovation and transitions towards how farmland is owned.
You probably know that there are good reasons to have a land trust like we have, but really there are so many points of crisis happening right now, which is the reason that we created this organization to try to start to address some of these. For instance, 2,000 acres of land is lost from agriculture every single day, and land prices are completely out of touch with reality. So farmland prices have increased by over 40% per decade, and young farmers cannot afford the price of farmland, especially with agriculture being their main source of income. We're seeing 37 mid-sized farms close each day, and the future of our food is just so uncertain. Add on the fact that most agriculture in this country is actually harmful and exploiting and extracting land, not helping to heal or better it at all. And when we think about the tools that aging farmers have to transition their land, there just are not a lot of good options that serve them and the future and the legacy of everything that they've built over decades of care and stewardship, such as the soil, but also the infrastructure and the markets and the communities that they've served. And so really, this model, the Farmland Commons and the Farmers Land Trust in general, is really trying to attack many of these issues from different directions, all centered around land and who gets access to it. So before we share about the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Commons and how we are uniquely different, first we thought it would be helpful if we share more about the current landscape of land trusts and what a typical land trust does and does not do.
And really, so conservation land trusts, both in the current landscape, where conservation land trusts focus on primarily conservation easements, so certain rights in land, to remove those rights and ensure the protection, ensure that those rights are never utilized. So development, extraction rights are severed from the land, held by land trusts, and in doing that, they're extinguished and the land is protected against those uses. And that is how majority of land trusts work and have worked since the early 1980s when conservation easements came to be. Conservation land trusts, though, have existed since the 1890s in this country, starting in Massachusetts with trustees for reservations, then on to New Hampshire with the Forest Society. And really all of that um, ethos and values are around a set of beliefs that humans are negatively impacting the land. And if we limit humans' uses, activities, rights in the land, we can preserve land for its natural resources, for its uh, wildlife, water quality, soil health, to in turn bring benefit back to humans and the earth. But really, it's the belief that separating humans and their uses from land will be beneficial to protect that land. And that's how conservation land trusts operate. Conservation land trusts, there's 3,000 plus around the country, and they work from very small town focused or single land parcel focused to statewide, regional, national, international in work. And there's many that collaborate with one another and work at different scales, and they hold in total tens of thousands of acres each year come into conservation land trusts.
And then the other type of typical land trust is a community land trust, which is very different than a conservation land trust. So community land trusts were very first started in the 1960s with the New Communities Land Trust in southern Georgia. And this was created as an act of Black liberation, where communities of color realized that if they were going to have security in their homes and the food that they had to eat and grow, that they needed to own the land themselves that all of this happened on. And so they created the very first community land trust, which was focused on agriculture and housing and community spaces. And then since then, the community land trust movement has evolved to be more focused on housing and infrastructure, but always focused on a very localized place. So town, county, region, small focus of location. And typically, the community land trust is focused on housing and infrastructure and works in the way that the community land trust owns the land only, and then individual people or entities own the buildings on top. So an individual can own their home, and that could be equity that they own that they can then sell in the future without owning the land underneath. And that way, affordability is ensured in that housing for future generations to come. And then we, the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Commons, is a new kind of land trust that's really merging the very best of a conservation land trust and also a community land trust, and focusing on the things that are really crucially important that both models offer into a new model. And so when we talk about commons, I think that is a term that is not typically used. And people like to talk about co-ops and cooperatives a lot, and that could be very complementary to commons. But really, holding land as commons is something that's been happening for a very long time. And there are even today many examples of land or services being held in common. And so applying that to land ownership, not its use, but its ownership, is not that far-fetched of an idea. In fact, we gain inspiration from many organizations and successes that are happening around the globe of holding land in common for regenerative agriculture and land access all over. And we have examples of that on our website, and we can share more about that in the Q&A session to follow.
So, and the common structure for us is a nonprofit land trust, and we do that for a variety of reasons. One of those is the bylaws and the formation agreements and the shared understandings between the parties involved in a nonprofit is what create that nonprofit's vision and mission and operational work. So the Farmland Commons, as a nonprofit, has bylaws that allow certain language, certain values to be embedded in it. And those carry forward to the lease and the management plan and shared agreements between parties and organizations. And so for us, some of our values are depicted right here in the slide. And what that means is that, we hold these as important. And what that also means is that the language in the legal structure that holds the land and the language that creates the agreement that leases the land out and creates an agreement for management of that land all speak to these values and more. And so for us to go a little deeper into us as an organization, so, primarily what we're talking about here is this model, the Farmland Commons model that we've created and we helped to create. But we are also the Farmers Land Trust, a national 501c3 nonprofit entity. And so for us, we, just as I mentioned in the model, the Farmland Commons, we, the Farmers Land Trust, have certain values, and those are embedded in our bylaws and our charter and our operations. And really, many of these are highlighted here. And just to name in these that for us, as we shared in our introductions, and we're so passionately connected to how land is owned, who has access and tenure to land, the types of agriculture and stewardship that are carried out on that land are all critically important to us. And so those are carried forward in our formation as an organization and in our operations as well. Back to the Farmland Commons structure. So the Farmland Commons structure is really a separate connected entity that is limited in scope to only holding real estate. In the Farmland Commons, it's farm real estate, but according to IRS, it could be any type of real estate, but it's limited to holding real estate, managing that real estate, and conveying lease of that real estate out. So that's the scope of the operations of a Farmland Commons entity. And then there's really two different types of Farmland Commons that we create and we support others creating. And so this example here, a 501c25, is a collaborative approach. And that's what we really focus on because a variety of reasons, but one that we feel we can get further in collaboration with others. We also feel that we as a national organization are best kind of utilized for the supports and the resources and the knowledge we have in partnership with local organizations who hold those relationships and understanding context of community. So this 501c25 structure requires at least 3 nonprofits and allows up to a maximum of 35 nonprofits according to IRS. So for us, this 501c25 structure allows us to be part of something, but not solely leading something. So we can partner with local nonprofit organizations. We can partner with other mission-aligned nonprofit organizations from around the country and really build a collaboration that can kind of go much further than we could alone, and that can also be durable beyond just us as an organization. So the 501c25 is one structure. The other structure is a 501c2. Similar structure, This is just tied to one nonprofit 501c3 organization. So, we could create this solely connected to us, but then there is not that local partnership and there's not that collaboration type structure. So, one area that we really advocate for this 501c2 structure is when there's an existing land trust that is already, you know, protecting land or holding land for different reasons, but they see the need and they see the value to own farmland and convey lease and equity in this structure. They're already set up to do much of the work. They're just not operating with this structure. So helping them, an existing nonprofit land trust, create a C2 allows them to, as they say, kind of expand their toolbox of resources. Now they have a new structure to hold land that they can continue doing the work they do, and they now just have an expanded resource toolkit to share and offer to landowners and farmers.
This is the very first time I'm ever looking at this illustration and thinking, that cow looks very tiny.
It's a small cow. It's a baby cow.
Maybe it's a calf. Thank you. And so these are the two different types of farmland commons. We have the 501c25 and the 501c2, both the same thing other than who is connected to them and how they're supported. And so yes, it takes longer and it's more complex to set up a 501c25 because there are more organizations involved, but then there's more resilience, and the long-term security for that land is held by multiple entities instead of just one. So if one were to dissolve or change mission, then the others are still there to support it, and building that collaboration in embedding it within the documents and the legal structure versus just saying that we want to be in community and work together really embodies our values and principles in a deeper way. And I would share too that both of these structures help do and give a liability shield for the nonprofits involved. So it is a way for them to co-own and support land without having to take on the liability associated with that. And also another reason that we chose these two structures is because, as Ian shared, because these structures are limited in scope and that they're only allowed to hold land and then lease that land out essentially, they are the structure that give the leaseholding farmer the most autonomy and the most independence on land, which is really what young farmers want. Like any farmer, they get into farming because they want to be their own boss. They don't want to have to listen to other people. And this structure allows that in the way of giving them all of the rights to the land without the ability to sell it in the future. And so then that Farmland Commons becomes its very own entity with its own board of people. So it is connected to an affiliate entity of those parent 501c3 organizations, but then that 501c25 or that 501c2 is its own entity with its own board of people, and then they exist to hold the deed to the land and then lease that land out. They do end up having their own budget and collecting any lease revenue. And lease revenue, typically in our model, is well below a typical market lease and is just the cost of taxes and insurance. And so it's up to that Farmland Commons board to collect the taxes and insurance through lease revenue and then make sure that those are paid. And then they help create the lease terms. And so while the board is creating the lease and then giving that lease to the next generation farmer, that farmer also holds a seat on the board. So as you can see here, the farmer is getting a lease, but also part of the board that's creating the lease.
So, and now to focus on another part of this is the land. So this farmland common structure is developed as just described, and now really it only exists to hold real estate as described. So how does farm real estate move into the structure? And this depicts that. So most of our work is with privately owned land by individuals, by families, by different people who are able to and aligned and wanting to transition their land through a donation or a discounted sale into this model. And so for the landowner to get a tax benefit of the donation, for fundraising to happen to purchase that land. A 501c3 is the first party in the land's journey forward. So the 501c3 is a public charity. So the 501c3, those that donate land or money get the tax benefit from giving to that 501c3. So the landowner who donates land or provides a discounted sale to the 501c3, they capture the tax benefit because they're giving to the public nonprofit. And then that 501c3 can raise money to then purchase the land or pay other project costs involved. And then once the land transitions into the 501c3, once that transaction is complete, funding is paid off, the land then transitions from that 501c3 into the Farmland Commons, that 501c25 or the 501c2. And really the 501c3 that it comes into, most of the time in our work, that is us as an organization, but it just has to be any one of those founding member 501c3s of that Farmland Commons structure. So, anyone could take the land in, anyone could be fundraising towards that project. But, that is the 501c3 party involved. And then it comes into the Farmland Commons. Once in there, then the Farmland Commons is holding title in the nonprofit commons structure and conveying lease tenure out. In the interim, as you can imagine, like a leaseholder may get a lease initially from a 501c3 as the land comes into the 501c3, and then that lease transfers to the Farmland Commons as the land transfers in. So the timing of things can differ some, but as the land moves through this diagram, the security for the farmer would also move the diagram in the same way. So, and then once the land is in this structure, as described, a lease is conveyed out. And as just detailed, the lease is developed with the parties involved. So the farmer who's going to receive the lease with the 501c3 nonprofit at first, with the Farmland Commons second. Sometimes it's in partnership, the Farmland Commons and that 501c3 to start with. It really all depends on the individual project, but overall, the lease is developed between the nonprofit Farmland Commons structure and the farmer, and the lease embeds in certain values in the same way that the bylaws do in other documents that we described before. So the leases for us in this work are as long-term as possible in ways that provide equity building components, in ways that allow for housing, land-based enterprise, renewable energy. The lease prescribes farming practices and stewardship standards to make sure it's organic, regenerative, biodynamic, chemical-free agriculture. So really they're trying to get at certain values, and the lease and then the farm management plan kind of codify those values into a shared agreement.
And so similar to how we described the ground lease with the community land trust, that could be a tool used in the Farmland Commons also, where the leaseholder is leasing the land, but then owning the house or infrastructure on the land. And this 99-year lease can be passed on to the next generation if that next generation wants to farm too, making it multi-generational. This lease also could be with any legal entity. So it could be with an individual or an LLC or a nonprofit or a co-op or. And so the lease could be with any other entity. It doesn't have to be an individual person. And so this is distinctly different than leasing land from a typical nonprofit or owning land in a typical nonprofit. And so very often we see when land is owned by nonprofits, for farming, that the nonprofit is getting involved in the day-to-day operations or trying to run programmatic work on it, and that is not legally allowed in this model. And so it's distinctly different in that way. It's also distinctly different because the leaseholder is sitting on the board, giving them power in decision making. There's also another way that this is distinctly different, which is that the leaseholder, the farmer, has a super vote on the board, meaning that nothing can pass without them being in affirmative of that, giving them more power also in that decision making. And this is just a way for nonprofits to support the land and the farmer with the access to network and resources that they have without being the ones to do the operations. And so just to break that down a little bit further and to add more clarity around the farmer. Oh, I'm sorry, Ian, this is your slide.
You're welcome to. I can chime in. But yeah, to echo what was introduced, to break this down a little more for the farmer's role in this structure, that, right, their board seat and their voting has additional authority that's baked into the bylaw structure itself. They are holding this long-term secure equity building lease that can be transitioned to future generation, can be transitioned to next farm business owner who might buy the rest of the infrastructure and assets of the farm. The lease has a term to it that will outlive any individual person or any individual farm business, so it can transition forward in many ways. The other components, like as mentioned, like the lease gets into farming practice and stewardship standards, but the other piece to really name here is that we recognize and see the challenges of farming as a lonely endeavor for many and a significant challenge to steward the land, to find markets, to build business, to fit in and be viable in our society. And we have this narrative that individual farmers can go out and find success, and it is lonely, and it leads to significant mental health challenges, to very high suicide rates. And so part of this model in total is just to bring people back together, to create community-based structure around the holding of land. And so farmers sitting on a board at times can seem like there's not enough hours in the day for a farmer to also add sitting on a nonprofit board and being involved with that. But the role and scope of these nonprofits is very limited, and the benefits of sitting on the board is they're connecting into a community that's solely coming together because they value these farms and they want to see them succeed. So the ability to build relationship, make connection, collaborate with the board of the Farmland Commons, with other farms held in that same Farmland Commons, with other Farmland Commons around the country, is all possible in this model, and it all is helping to rebuild those threads of connection. To summarize what we've been sharing in some ways, just with kind of making sure there's clarity in the ways that can really be expansive, we shared 4 of these points here. And as a bigger picture, each one of these projects, Farmland Commons projects, each one of these farms and communities is different one to the next. And so there's a need and an openness to have this structure evolve and adapt and stretch to meet the needs of the farm and the community and the specific Farmland Commons. So, that the ability for collaboration, as we mentioned in that 501c25, that's a real value of ours. And the ability for this to adapt in different ways is really important. So, conservation land trusts and conservation easements can be a part of this. The land in a Farmland Commons might already be under a conservation easement, might come under a conservation easement at a later time. Community land trusts and housing can be part of this. Other kind of community organizations around food, farming, education, health can all be part of this in different ways. And all of this really is only possible if landowners, which are primarily private landowners, decide to transition their land into the structure. So for this work to happen, it is essential that privately owned farmland and the owners of that land are willing and able to participate and move their land into this structure. And so the bigger picture, the structure and the pieces we've been talking about is really, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time to bring about, and it takes people and organizations and really the relationships and agreements they form to make it all possible. So this illustration is depicting just the path and the steps involved in this. And we have this on our website. We have this on our website with links to many of the documents that are involved in this. And we show this just to kind of give people an understanding of the areas of focus involved in building this structure. It's, bringing people together and holding those relationships and coming together around shared values and agreements. It's the forming the entity through agreements and documents, and then incorporating, and it's moving land and then conveying out lease tenure to that land. And so for us, this is a way to depict this structure. I would share that for us, where we start in this path differs from one project to the next, and that's perfectly fine and normal and how it should be. But so it's far more convoluted than this illustration depicts, like where we start, what the sequence is of what happens next, what is forward progress or kind of circling back to attend to something else. Like there's all of these steps are needed, but they may move forward at different pace and different sequence depending on where things start with a local community.
And so all of this that we've shared and everything that we do is on our website as an open resource tool that anyone can pick up and use. And what that means is that without talking to us or anyone else at the Farmers Land Trust, anyone anywhere in the United States could go pull all of the legal templates from our website and then create a farmland commons structure on their very own. And that is incredible. And really, our values around decommodifying land and making it accessible is also true for knowledge and resources, and that we feel that everyone should have access to this. And in addition to that, you could just use pieces of it. And so maybe you are in a situation where you're thinking about leasing land to or from someone, and you want something that is more progressive in the way that it speaks to stewardship and also connection to land. You are welcome to come grab our lease template and use just that. And so really invite you all to explore the resources that we have created in collaboration with attorneys and landowners and new and beginning farmers and aging farmers and nonprofit leaders and organizations in other countries who are already doing this successfully, and really dive into it and tear it apart and tell us what works and let us know what you think doesn't. And we'd love to hear from you about it too.
So, and just to add to this, for us, we're a national organization. So we work around the country, as we're about to describe to you. And so all of these template documents are a starting point from a national context. So they do not consider state to state laws. They do not consider community specifics or farm specifics or individuals' needs and values. So really, they're a starting place, but they need to go through these steps of considering and being evolved to meet state law, considering the people, community, land involved, and really being localized to place.
And so we've shared this model and this concept in a lot of theory, but wanted to share the actual people that we're working with in the communities around the country that we're working with. So this is our ecosystem map, and if you go to our website and choose the Farmland Commons tab, then you can interact with the ecosystem map and click on all the projects and read more about the people. And just to share some of the differences. So everyone and everywhere on this map are so uniquely different in where they are, what kind of agriculture they're focused on, what communities they're serving. For instance, in Washington, we're working with an aging, retiring couple who are biodynamic farmers who have been stewarding their land for over 50 years, who are donating their land in and retaining a life estate to not only live there until they die, but to also be buried on that farm. They're also retaining an option for their children and grandchildren to steward the land in the future, if that is what those next generation heirs want to do. Opposite end of the spectrum, we are working in Baltimore, Maryland to find farmland for these farmers who are already growing food for their community, but who need additional land. And so we're doing outreach to landowners, GIS mapping, working with attorneys to find out chain of title. And it is all incredibly fun and also important. These farmers deserve and need land. In other places, we're working with land donors who are donating their land in and then not having any connection to the land other than being part of the Farmland Commons Board moving forward. In other places, for instance, in Tennessee, we are helping to create a Farmland Commons while not being one of the 501c3s that are going to be one of the parents of that Farmland Commons entity. So in that case, we are providing technical assistance and support and guidance in creating the Farmland Commons, but we are not one of the nonprofits involved. And that is a beautiful example of a movement catching on and taking shape and having a life of its own. And so really why we're here, though, is to talk more about Blue Rock Station and the Blue Rock Farmland Commons. And I wonder if, Annie, you would like to share more on that?
Oh, okay. I thought I was just listening. Sure. Well, you want to be more specific about what you'd like me to say?
You could share, well, how about we'll do this in collaboration. So we were invited in by Annie to work with her on transitioning her land to create a Blue Rock Farmland Commons. And I guess if you want to share more about your vision for the farm, and then we can talk about the next chapter.
Well, okay, thanks. That gave me a minute to think about what to say. So one thing I do want to say, and Ian brought this up, is at least for me, I met Ian online in a webinar several years ago, and I was immediately smitten with the idea of a farmland trust because we had never, ever just thought we would sell. We felt like this is a place of peace, and it's a place I've been walking to all my life and dreaming of. And of course, 32 years now, and I still feel that way about it. But I wanted it to be protected. I felt fiercely about that. And I also am the farmer by myself. My husband has a whole career of his own, and he was helpful to me. But after a while, his business grew and he was over it, as he would like to say. So I've just been the happiest person to be there and to be by myself as the farmer. But it is lonely, and sometimes it's harsh when you have, a dozen goats all kidding in the same week and you're the only farmer and there's a problem, then there's really a problem. But anyway, for the most part, it was wonderful. And so then later I had a really serious accident and I had to learn to walk again. And that was now will be 2 years ago in April. And I was on a webinar with Women, Food, and Agriculture Network. And that's where I met Kristina. And I'm just not belaboring this too much, but just to say so, it all took time. I wasn't even thinking in the beginning when I met Ian that I was going to ever really need to do this because I intended to die there. but I wanted an insurance policy. And I feel like that's what this has been. And so my vision for where I was going was to find a family, not just, you know, two people, two adults, but some generational wealth that had the potential to occur. And we got lucky. And it was plenty long enough for me anyway process. And I realized I had a lot more involvement than maybe other farmers. But so now here we are, and we've gone through most of the paces, and the land transfer will happen soon, the deed transfer. We're practically rock stars because we've all been good at promoting what we're doing because we are so passionate in what we believe. And so we ended up on the front page of Farm and Dairy, which might not seem that big a deal to some folks, but it is the farm newspaper for really the western part of Pennsylvania and all of Ohio. And it's a big deal for farmers. I always say Farm and Dairy is my conservative paper and the Guardian's my progressive one, and I read both faithfully. So my new life, moving forward, I started moving in March, moving rocks and all kinds of things. Not the things normal people would be moving, but my life was there, and I still feel incredibly sad about leaving. But I'm happy where I am. And part of the reason that can happen is because I chose well in the people that I would work with and the organization I would work with. And I also have lovely former interns who have stepped up to the plate and been the voice in much of the decisions, whether it was out in the open or not, they were guiding. And so there's been intergenerational influence on the decisions that have been made. It hasn't all just been me. And now I'm doing food forest gardening in the city, in a town of 15,000. You know, by 2050, 2/3 of the world is going to be urban. And so once again, I think I'm being innovative to start food forest in a town and teach people. So I'm not giving up. I'm just walking differently. And thanks for the opportunity to say something.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. And just to be clear, you've always been a rock star.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
We just sent out our most recent Blue Rock Farmland Commons newsletter today, and I just put it in the chat in case anyone wants to get caught up on where the Blue Rock Farmland Commons is right now and what's happening right now.
Oh, wait, I want to say one more thing is that we are going to be on the BBC in January. So that's when we're officially named rock stars, but it won't just be me. It'll be a few other people. And it does mention that in the Farm and Dairy Journal, but we'll be doing some other things also around the BBC documentary.
And so since this is being recorded for compliance purposes, I'm just going to swoop in with, we will be on bbc.com with a video produced by BBC Storyworks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so that is our presentation on the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Commons, and we so appreciate you all joining us for this. Thank you so much. If you could connect with us on your favorite social media, follow us on, sign up for our newsletter, and then make a donation to either the Farmers Land Trust or the Blue Rock Farmland Commons, or both, we would be so grateful. And yeah, I would love comments, conversation, discussion, reflections.
Thank you, Kristina, Ian, and Annie for sharing again. This is part 2 of our 6-part series, really highlighting the Farmers Land Trust process, the Farmland Commons as an option for us to consider for farmland. And on behalf of Central State University Extension too, I just want to, highlight what you said at the beginning, how there is such a need for options for farmland transition, access for those who don't have it, and a pathway for those that are looking for what's next, which is something that Central State University Extension is really interested in exploring too across the state. So thank you very much for this partnership. And it looks like we have a hand raised. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Hi, so Tara Steyerman, I have a property that I steward in northern Utah. And this is really helpful. I'll probably have to watch this like 10 more times because I think this has probably been like the 5th or 6th time I've heard it. And I think I'm finally starting to get it. And has there been, so once a piece of property is entered into the first step, like the 501c3, has there been any, like, what's the a way that like demonstrates like protection that it is then going to go into a farmland commons? Like, has there been anyone question that, like, where, like, okay, so I'm going to donate this property to this 501c3, what's my guarantee that it's going to move into that? And then how are there ways to set it up so that maybe then someone who, like, I'm thinking someone that donates property in my area may then want to be on the board and want to have some, and like, and so are there ways to kind of guarantee that actually happens? Does that make sense?
Yeah, fully. So really, anytime someone donates to a nonprofit, money or land or some sort of asset, they and the nonprofit have to decide, is it a unrestricted gift or a restricted gift?
Mhm.
And then the nonprofit
Okay.
has to categorize that and treat it, you know, as it should be in what category. So really, what someone would do is give that gift of a farm, say, as a restricted gift for the benefit of that farmland commons, and include the name if it's already,
Mhm.
formed in some way, or include the location in some way. And same, that could also include restrictions on, them getting a seat on the board or certain
Mhm.
things carrying forward on that farm, certain practices or stewardship. And really it does come down to that nonprofit agreeing to that restriction. Like there are some proposed gifts that we or other nonprofits might get that just either they're not aligned with our values and vision, or like
Mhm.
they would be so difficult to achieve that restriction that it's not something we or others could accept, with certain
Mhm.
conditions. But conditions like giving for direct, benefit of and receipt of that farmland commons, whether it's land or money, is how we handle that, and is a great way to address that.
Okay. And if a 501c3, it then transitions to a 501c2, can that original nonprofit still be involved?
Yes. So that original
Okay.
nonprofit can also be the leaseholder themselves, or
Okay.
like they are still having board representation on that C2 board. So there are multiple ways that they can still be connected. And, that's something we didn't talk about, which is how nonprofits are involved if they are not one of the parent entities. And so there are still
Mhm.
roles of collaboration and engagement and support that community members and also nonprofits can play in supporting a farmland commons and being connected to that without being embedded legally in the entity itself.
Okay. And so it sounds like a 501c25 or C2, you can still have multiple nonprofits collaborating. It's just a little bit different structures.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I wanted to say, Tara, if you would like to meet with us, I don't know where else Ian and Christine are going to be, but we're going to be speaking at a couple of conferences over the winter, and we're really fun people.
Well, Annie is.
And
You
it's
are,
near.
yes.
Well, I am the funny person, but Ian, it's going to be Ian's birthday, which I
I
know he
too can be
doesn't.
funny sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's true. Ian's makes me laugh, but so does Christina, but my sense of humor might be weird. But anyway, but definitely, and it'll be Ian's birthday in February. So if you would like to meet up, and have time to talk, but also do other interesting things, because they're both farm conferences. I
Oh,
invite
where
you
at?
to. Well, I don't know about the one in Ohio for sure, because I haven't heard, but definitely in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the weekend of Valentine's Day. So you could
Okay.
come hang out, and we'll tell you everything we know.
So
Well,
the
so what's
Pennsylvania one's
interesting,
actually the weekend.
oh,
Sorry, the one in Pennsylvania is actually the weekend before Valentine's. So that's
I'm
Thursday.
very
the-
sorry. I'm very sorry. I got the
Yeah.
date wrong. I
So
do that all the time.
February 5th, Annie and
Okay.
I will be co-presenting in Pennsylvania. The PASA conference is hosting us for a BBC Storyworks film screening and panel discussion with us and also one of the next generation farmers that we're working with. So we'll be in Pennsylvania for that at that time. Ian, the next weekend, the Valentine's Day weekend, will be in, is it Colorado for the National Biodynamic Association?
Loveland, Colorado. How fitting, right? For the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hot tamales.
So I am
Cold it'll be, but
I'm originally from northeastern Ohio, so I grew up in like a Cleveland suburb, and so I actually have family around Lancaster, which is really just interesting. So this could be a possibility.
Well, we'd love to see you there. Yeah, that would be great.
Well, that sounds like a great connection. We're close to the 8 o'clock time, or at least 8 o'clock Eastern time. Does anybody else have any questions for our presenters this evening? This presentation is recorded, so it will be up on the Central State University YouTube on our playlist along with the first presentation, and we'll have the whole series eventually. So kind of like what was mentioned, that like I've heard this presentation many times and I think I'm just now getting it. It is a lot, and that's why we want to make sure this is available and recorded to come back to. Also, you got an email from me earlier today with that link to the playlist. Feel free to share that. We want to get the word out and make this an opportunity for anybody to consider that may not know it exists. So we appreciate everybody's interest in the series. I hope many of you signed up for the next session, and we'll just keep working through this whole process and the journey. There's even things planned, dates planned for future webinars where we don't even fully know the content yet because things are still evolving. We'll have more story to share as we go. So I hope you'll join us for the whole story and be part of spreading the word that we have some options that are maybe new to us, but some really exciting options for that land transition and land access. So Kristina, Ian, Annie, thank you so much for joining us again. And I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which will be after the new year in January.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much, Denise.
Thanks, Denise, for being a trailblazer. I appreciate it.